We are slaying monsters.
Don't let the ghosts and the ghouls disturb you, darling.
Wolfman is not doing well in theaters.
Which one is this again?
It came out this month. It came out like a couple days ago. And it is not. Let's see, 3.0 on Google, 52% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Oh. Isn't the guy who did The Witch, isn't he doing a Wolfman too? Or a werewolf movie?
Robert Eggers is doing a werewolf movie. It's completely independent from everything else. This is sort of under the branch of Universal Studios yet.
Oh.
His isn't Universal Studios. His is just a werewolf movie.
It would never be
story.
that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not franchisable.
Okay.
Everybody is kind of secretly hoping that this Wolfman movie does well and they can franchise it and like resurrect the Invisible Man that they created, but it's not going to happen. I don't want to like bash my industry on the podcast.
Yeah.
Not shit like that, you know.
South by Southwest is okay though.
South by Southwest is okay because they're like acting a fool, you know. I feel bad doing it for movies where people are legitimately just like trying to get by. I have more sympathy for that shit, if that makes sense, you know.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of people like you don't know what the hell is involved in all of this. It's entirely possible that, you know, everybody's out there just trying to make money in this movie, and it doesn't help that their werewolf looks kind of lame. I don't really like the look of the Wolfman style creature. You know, I like werewolves that shift from person into wolf, and I like werewolves that are kind of like big, angry, bipedal dogs. Mm-hmm. But the like sort of bestial humanoid look to it was always a little weird, and I don't know. I feel like a werewolf needs to have a dog face and a dog snout, longer hair and stuff, and probably shouldn't be wearing clothes in order to look scary. When you just have like shaggy humans, they're a little meh to me.
I think that the Wolfman thing falls into the uncanny valley area, and so I think it's extra hard to wrap your head around it.
Yeah, it's got to be one or the other.
Yeah.
You're either a big dog or you're a person.
Yep.
But you can't be just like a hairier person. That's not a wolf man.
we know in our gut that is not right.
Right. Yeah.
And so we are quicker to believe if you can pull it off right, watching a man form into a full wolf. I think we can understand that. But it's harder to get us as humans to understand a completely new creature.
Right. Yeah, totally. I always had some sympathy for Oz from Buffy because their budget was so limited. I never really liked the look of the werewolf in Buffy. It always looked kind of like a monkey man.
Yeah, he looked like a monkey, yeah.
But I understand it because you don't quite have the budget for it. And so you got to do what you can with what you have. I think that Hemlock Grove did some of the best werewolfery that I've seen. You know, the whole concept of them, like the skin falling off and then them eating the skin and stuff was really cool. And there again, they just became wolves. They were just like big, angry wolves. What was the True Blood? True Blood did the same thing. You just turned into werewolves were just big wolves, or Sam was, just a shifter? I think they just called them shifters, and so he was like whatever animal he wanted.
Yeah, and so what we're seeing here with Bray Road is more of a Wolfman character, right? You're seeing more of that humanoid.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and that's why Bray Road is often conflated with the dogman mythos, because the dogman is the human with a dog head. Mm-hmm. Like we call them cynocephali, remember, from Greek mythology. But yeah, so they are more of a bipedal, big, shaggy dog. They're actually what I want to see if I'm going to watch a werewolf movie, you know? I want to see cynocephali style creature as opposed to, yeah, the Wolfman, like 1941, that Wolfman, or the Werewolf of London or something like that, just doesn't fit the werewolf style that I like to see. And unfortunately, I think this new movie that's coming out, actually got released earlier this week, is probably it seems like it's the same thing. It's more of that, just a hairy person, not a cool wolf. I like wolves in my werewolves.
All right, well, there's your hot take.
Hot take.
We're slaying monsters.
Yeah.
We got Maddie J here
What's
across
up?
the table, and I'm EJ.
Howl.
How are you today?
Howl.
Do you like that?
I'm great.
Good. Oh,
I'm
good. I'm okay.
I feel like the answer to that question for quite a few years is going to be, I'm okay.
Yeah.
I'm okay.
For me, it's going to be like, well, I'm still alive.
Still alive. Still alive, still human for now. For now. So yeah, we are going to talk about Bray Road. We're going to bring it home and talk about the origins of Bray Road, the origins of the myth, the origins of the dogman, and where it is today. So when we last left cartoonist turned journalist Linda Godfrey, she was, or had at least become, the resident expert on dog-headed humanoids in America. Her book, The Beast of Bray Road, set the cryptozoology world alight. What was lurking in the Wisconsin woods and stalking the road? A werewolf? A new species? Or maybe a more sinister demonic creature conjured by a satanic cult?
The third one.
The third one,
Yeah,
obviously.
definitely the third one.
As she continued to investigate, she'd come across a witness, Mark Shackleman, who claimed to have seen the dogman as early as the 1930s. He was the one who saw it. It was digging on a Native American burial mound. He was one of the ones who said, man, it was like a creature out of hell. I hope it went back to hell. We're all throughout the whole thing, because even Lori Andrezzi, who supposedly hit it with her car, or I'm sorry, who supposedly saw it on the side of the road, said that she thought it was satanic. Almost everyone who encounters this thinks that it has some type of satanic relationship.
Now, was that an after the fact thing?
What do you mean?
Well, did Lori Andrezzi say that it was satanic after the idea of a satanic creature came about, or did she come up with it completely on her own?
I think she came up with it on her own, although it's hard to say. I love Linda Godfrey. I think that she was a really clever voice in the cryptozoology world, and she certainly came to this as a surprise to her, But she's not exactly what I would consider a intrepid journalist or a fantastic investigator.
Do you think she could be biased in some way too toward that idea, satanic idea?
I think that Linda Godfrey did a lot of connecting the dots in ways that probably were not the most beneficial to the actual reality of what was going on.
Okay.
Because for a period of, I mean, honestly, from the early 90s on, basically any report that she got, she investigated it as if it could be a dogman report. Mm-hmm. And so I think it blinded her to a lot of the possibilities, the more mundane possibilities of what things could have been. Linda Godfrey's one of those people who was definitely guilty of always looking for the dogman, always looking for the thing she wanted to find, sort of, and yet we all do it to a certain extent.
Yeah.
But as a journalist, she probably shouldn't have been doing that. Especially, I mean, she published books on the thing, but all of her books are always sitting down, interviewing people, and then finding out that, whoa, what they saw seems an awful lot like what I'm writing about.
Well, and I think that we're missing a piece then if she is more biased, because it would be really nice to know how much the rumor mill influenced the story after the fact or while it was unfolding versus did Lori Andrezzi truly come up with a satanic idea by herself. Nothing happens in a silo. These aren't siloed incidents. These are incidents that people discuss all together while we have the journalist building the story.
Right.
So I know it's probably hard to say, but if I had to guess, I think everything caught on like wildfire. Everybody influenced everybody else. And it almost doesn't matter, honestly, from a practical standpoint, if the satanic thing came from Lori or not. If she came up with it on her own, because there's no satanic, it's not real. But I do think it would be interesting from a sociological standpoint how much this took shape because of the rumor mill of the town. That's all.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and we'll talk a little bit about what the collective consciousness was thinking about at the time. We talked in the last episode about how we had just come off of the satanic panic, and so that was prevalent in people's minds. And so when you start seeing something unusual, the jump is to Satanism. And that I think influenced quite a bit. And then another little piece that we're going to talk about a little later in this episode was sort of what I think is the missing piece across all of it.
Cool.
Now, Linda Godfrey, in her research, she uncovered some evidence that seemed to imply that the dogman was actually even older than the 1930s in Mark Shackleman's sighting. There was a local urban legend of the story of lumberjacks from Wexford, Michigan, and the strange animal that they saw. Now, according to the North Michigan History Site, this happened. This was 1897, okay? They described the creature as a 7-foot-tall monster with a dog's head and the torso of a man, and it was said to have blue or amber eyes with a howl that sounded like a human. He, meaning the dogman, is said to walk upright on his 2 hind legs. There have been numerous sightings throughout Michigan. So when she found this blew Godfrey's mind. How is it possible that a creature like this could exist even in the wilds, like even in the woods of Michigan, Wisconsin? How could it have existed for so long being undetected? What is this thing?
Do you know what this is making me think of, though?
What?
The lumberjack story we had earlier on in the California woods, and how all these guys, their pastime was to make stories up.
Well, and we talked about that in our History of Sasquatch series, where these lumberjacks, you know, they lived this kind of transient lifestyle. They're kind of bopping from camp to camp, whatever. And you would be out sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months on a job site with nothing to do but gamble and fight and make up stories. And this is exactly the type of story that they would make up. We talked about the axe hound that would eat your axe handle if you left your axe out and that kind of stuff. You know, the hide behind was the thing that would hide behind the tree and then jump out and get you. So yes, this is very much in keeping with all the lumberjack, they call them fearsome critters, the fearsome critters that the lumberjacks claim to see out there. But let's just take a minute right now and break down some of the possible explanations for what the dogman is and what these alleged werewolf sightings could be. EJ, do you have any theories?
I think that it is, like I said last time, I think I said it's a lot of things, but I think it's mainly bear with mange.
Okay.
That's my biggest theory there.
Yeah, sure. It's kind of one of our usual suspects when it comes to hairy bipeds, because bears, I mean, they actually do stand on their hind legs, solves a bunch of problems. However, as Linda Godfrey points out, many of the witnesses were familiar with bears and vehemently denied that they saw a bear when they reported their sighting. The dogman is often described as sleeker, thinner, less bulky. That's where the mange comes in. Now, mange is a skin condition caused by a parasitic mite. These mites burrow into the skin and the hair follicles of the animal and cause that patchy fur loss appearance. And they give like an anemic appearance to the animal as well. So that can result in a skinny, thin-haired bear, which actually does fit the description of the witnesses a lot of the times. If you look at black bears with mange, they really do look like a cross between a dog and a bear, while being totally different from either animal too.
Yeah, I saw the pictures, and they're really scary looking, kind of, and they're sad. And I really did see the dogman in those photos, big time.
Yeah. And that fur loss also enhances the look of the claws, which is one of the things that all the witnesses were fixated on, these long claws. Now, of course, we could compare to a misidentified dog, coyote, or a wolf, too, which would fit the head appearance of the dog-headed man, right? But it doesn't explain the huge size and the animal walking on two legs. However, canines are highly adaptable animals that can exhibit some weird behavior in the right circumstances. Dogs with injured or disabled front paws will learn to balance upright on their back legs for brief periods of time, and can even hobble short distances like that. Mountain lions, cougars, or panthers have been mentioned as possible explanations as well, but I think these fit the bill even less than a dog. While I do believe that the sightings in dark environments can sometimes play tricks on the mind, you still have the same problems. Cougars look very different from the dogman descriptions. They're still quadrupeds. They have these long tails, while the dogman is often described as being tailless. And their facial appearance is totally wrong. The dogman has a snout. Cougars don't have a snout, you know?
It's also the way in which they move.
No.
Cats move very specifically.
Yeah. Linda Godfrey herself is fond of the new animal theory. The idea that an obligatory bipedal canine evolved somewhere in North America or possibly in parts of Europe and basically remained hidden for centuries. But paleontologist and cryptid enthusiast Darren Naish rejects this theory. And he points out that thanks to domestication, we have an extremely robust fossil record for canines, and we have no evidence of obligatory bipedal walking in the evolution.
There you go.
So
That's a good point.
now, of course, there's an explanation that links the dogman to our other favorite hairy biped, the Sasquatch. Is it possible that the dogman is just a misidentified Sasquatch?
Yes.
I mean, maybe.
It's a Sasquatch with mange.
But even if we take Sasquatch at face value and assume, let's put it out there, let's assume that Sasquatch exists for the sake of argument for this. That still doesn't explain the snouts, the pointed ears, the long claws, and this canine appearance.
You got me there.
Plus, there's the whole problem of Sasquatches being, at best, a very fringe theory. And then the most outlandish theory comes out of the Utah desert, actually, and the infamous paranormal hotbed, Skinwalker Ranch.
Yay, Skinwalker Ranch.
So a ranch hand there once claimed to see a human-sized bipedal wolf. But to them, it wasn't a werewolf or a dogman. It was a skinwalker, the creature for which the ranch is named. Although, as a side note, Brian Dunning of Skeptoid refutes that the ranch was named for the monsters and claims that it was actually named after the Tony Hillerman book Skinwalker.
Well.
Now, do you know anything about skinwalkers, the mythological creature?
And I think they're a Navajo-based myth.
Yeah, they're from Navajo folklore. The Denver Public Library explains that they are shape-shifting witches whose evil magic allowed them to assume the form of animals. This power often comes from a mortal sin, like killing and murdering a sibling. That was actually in True Blood. Do you remember that? If you killed, I think, your sibling or your parent, you could become a skinwalker?
Yes.
Yeah. And many of these alleged skinwalkers felt as if they were inflicted with the condition rather than in control of it. They were being punished for their transgressions by this, like, affliction of evil, at least according to them. So once again, we see lycanthropes or dogmen linked to these demons and these evil creatures. And this, honestly, is one of the reasons that the dogman myth is so enduring, I think. Half human, half dog is an affront to evolution no matter how you cut it. If it's a shape-shifting human, that makes zero sense in modern biology, of course. If it's a bipedal dog with the body of a human, that makes zero sense too. And if there are things that don't quite fit into the established rules that science has laid out for evolution, there can be only one explanation for them, a supernatural one. Gods are real. I believe the dogman or werewolf or skinwalker or wendigo or whatever you like slot into a very particular argument for a subset of the population. If they can be proven to exist, they create a rift that science can't solve. And if we invalidate mainstream science, then other less mainstream theories have to come to the table. That opens the door for religion, which has taken more and more of a back seat as science has started to explain the natural world in the last 150 years. If you look at the rise of the dogman mythos, especially in the post-internet world, you can match its rising popularity with the rise of modern evangelism and the new reformation that we're starting to see emerge from far-right religious factions. While it seems entirely out of character for these figures to be championing a demonic shapeshifter, the dogman and other fringe cryptids serve as an incredibly effective tool for several reasons. If they exist, and to be completely clear, they don't. This isn't fucking real. But if they exist, it helps to destabilize modern science for the reasons we just talked about. But it also means that there is a demonic force out there that's turning people into animals. And if that's true, that can be heralded as a reason to search for salvation. And where are you going to look for that? Religious texts. In short, you don't need to prove God is real to make people turn to the Bible. You only need to invalidate science. And that's a troubling new take on the Fortean because it means that what should be fun discussions about monsters and make-believe that we're having now is being co-opted by the religious right to push their own agenda. It's the weaponization of cryptids.
How long do you think that's been going on?
That's a hard question because I kind of want to say it was happening in France during the werewolf panic. Or Salem during the witch trials, or Western New York during the rise of modern spiritual mediums. I mean, remember the French werewolf panic was set against the Inquisition, which was itself in response to rising science of the Renaissance and a major precursor to the Age of Enlightenment.
I think that this is a really clever thing. If it's an orchestrated thing that religion has done, it's very clever because you can rule people much more easily through fear and hatred than you can through reason and logic.
Absolutely.
And cool-headedness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is what we're seeing unfolding in our country right now. But it's but if you take it from a religious encrypted standpoint, I can easily see this. Maybe at first it wasn't planned.
But I don't think so.
Yeah, but maybe they were like, whoa, wait a minute. We can control people through fear this way. Ooh, let's use this.
And I'm not even sure that it is so directly malicious either. But I think that it's more of whoa, I'm hearing these reports. Well, that's the perfect thing to get people into the church, basically,
Yeah.
Yeah, when you have a strange sighting on the roadside and you present it to a biologist, the biologist is going to try to figure out what it is from the natural world. When you present it to somebody who's of a more religious mind, they are probably going to be more inclined or can be more inclined to connect it to their own dogma and therefore call it satanic, call it evil, whatever, and then encourage people to follow them for their explanation.
And if I'm being totally honest, asking you, what do you think is more interesting? What do you think is more fun? What, your daily life is boring, whatever, maybe. What
My
would you
life's
pick?
okay.
Okay, you're a boring dummy. But every day, just asking Joe on the street,
right.
What would you pick if you wanted to pick one? What would appeal to you more? And I think most people would say it appeals, the spiritual angle appeals.
Well, And I mean, look at me. Like, I didn't get interested in this because I was like, oh, cool, I want to find out what real animals are out there. And I want to find the mundane explanation of all of this stuff. I think most of us didn't, even the people who are more rationally minded. I think most of us got into it because we were like, oh, cool, there's a plesiosaur in Loch Ness. I want to learn about it.
Yeah, I think you have to, it forces people like me to look back and be like, what made you believe this stuff in the first place? And it's hard to say. A lot of it was what I believed a lot of this stuff when I was a kid. So I can't go back and think about what that moment was.
Right.
But it was definitely an exciting time, I can tell you.
Yeah.
And some people go their whole lives, believing that, holding on to that exciting time. And I totally understand that. That's much more exciting.
And I mean, there's a whole host of reasons for it,
a million reasons, yeah.
Because it's comforting. It's comforting to know that maybe your life is laid out for you. It's comforting in a way to believe that there are things greater than us.
Mm-hmm. And maybe it slots into your religion nicely.
Maybe it does. Yeah, maybe it does.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think that whenever we see science and secular thought arising, religion is always going to be there to counteract. The church weaponized witches and werewolves in the past. It's not really a surprise that they're doing the same thing with dogmen now.
Yeah, no, but what's interesting to me is that I don't see dogmen hitting the news headlines the way that, let's say, the witches would have been hitting the headlines in the late 1600s. So to me, it's a bit of a sleeper cell because I don't see this happening.
I think you're not looking at the right headlines.
I don't have the Google alert like you do.
Right. Yeah. No. Absolutely. I mean, and I do, and my algorithm is definitely more tuned for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, my algorithm is like rock climbing, and yours is like aliens. And yeah.
But the world exists in a different way now, where like we don't necessarily get our news from the front page of a newspaper, but we do get our news from TikTok, and we get our news from a Google search. So these cryptids, these sort of fringe cryptids like the Dogman, the Beast of Bray Road, are present and sort of heavily featured on these social media sites. And because of that, they are becoming news for a new generation. And that's not the generation that picks up a newspaper and reads it cover to cover. That's the generation that hears the word dogman, is like, I don't know what that is, Googles it, watches 8 TikTok videos about it, and says, holy shit, there's a dog-headed thing in Wisconsin.
Yeah, or it sends them to the Skinwalker Ranch, and they're down that rabbit hole.
Exactly, yeah, sure. And then it's not a long jump from there to UFOs to,
conspiracy
theory and all of these things. And then before you know it, that's what the algorithm is feeding you.
Yeah, man. And then you think that there's a child sex ring in a pizza shop, and that's the end of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So to be clear, I think that the most likely explanation is a black bear with mange, at least of the initial sightings. It's not out of the question that a mangy bear, already a little disturbed by its conditions, found something to eat alongside the road and was more interested in its meal than a passing car. And I don't think it's crazy to think that it later got clipped by a motorist and might have lashed out in fear and anger.
I mean, a bear can be very powerful even when it's sick, especially maybe when it's sick.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, while these stories may not actually be influenced by lunar cycles the way that werewolves are, I believe lycanthropes are still cyclical. They respond to the tide of religious reformation in the world. Remember, Lori Andrezzi thought her sighting was a satanic creature. Mark Shackleman, the night watchman, claimed to scare his own dogman away by praying. None of these theories, however, explain the origins of the dogman. The real, where did this archetype come from, right? At least in modern times. The werewolf we know, that has been around for centuries, right? But why did the werewolf suddenly pop up in the American Midwest? Well, I think the origin comes from the other side of Lake Michigan, Traverse City, the cherry capital of the world and home to Steve Cook, radio producer. Cook was a folklore fan with a penchant for practical jokes, a combination we know all too well in the cryptozoology space. In a 2008 interview with MyNorth.com, Cook said, "I've always loved Bigfoot, Loch Ness, so I decided it was time to create a creature that was unique to northern Michigan." In 1987, Cook wrote a poem for fun called The Legend. It chronicles a century of reports of a bipedal, dog-faced creature that lived in the woods. Here are some of the lyrics. It's long, but I'll read some of the lyrics. 11 lumberjacks near the Garland Swamp found an animal they thought was a dog. In a playful mood, they chased it around till it ran inside a hollow log. A logger named Johnson grabbed him a stick and poked around inside. Then the thing let out an unearthly scream and came out and stood upright. In 1917, a sheriff was out a-walkin', found a driverless wagon and tracks in the dust like wolves had been a-stalkin'. In 1967, a vanload of hippies told a park ranger named Quinlan they'd been awakened in the night by a scratching at the window. Quinlan, window. There was a dogman looking in and grinning.
Oh my God.
The concept of this poem was the dogman appeared every 10 years, did some killing, and then vanished for another decade. Cook concluded the poem with an ominous warning about 1987. So far this spring, no stories have appeared. Have the dogmen gone away? Have they disappeared? Soon enough, I guess, we'll know, 'cause summer's almost here. And in this decade called the 80s, the 7th year is here. And somewhere in the Northwoods darkness, a creature walks upright. And the best advice you may ever get is don't go out at night.
Very good.
To set the stage for all of this, Laurie Andrezzi's sighting was 1989. Then Doris Gibson apparently hit the creature the following year, 1990. And then Linda Godfrey got into all of this research around 1991. Cook set his poem to music and played it on WTCM radio on April 1st, 1987. This followed the station's tradition of playing various April Fool's pranks. Cook admitted that they were short on ideas that year, and his poem was all they could come up with in a short amount of time.
It does feel like a slap together poem for sure. No, I mean listen, but for what it is, he did a great job rhyming Quinlan with anything else.
With winda
and something else.
And grinnin'.
Grinnin'.
Yeah, I'm not sure winda even rhymes with grinnin' either, but who am I?
I applaud the effort.
After the poem aired on April 1st, 1987, people started calling in and reporting their own sightings of the creature. Word spread, and more people started reporting. It's hard to tell who was being serious and who was just playing along with the prank, because remember, it was April 1st. So theoretically, everybody knew it was a joke. The radio station had a reputation of doing pranks every April 1st.
So people were calling in over the air.
Yes.
So people were hearing these stories over the air, and
yes.
It was coming down into this area that...
Exactly.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So anybody who was listening to the radio show was then calling in and saying, oh, by the way, I saw the dogman too. Soon, people started saying that Cook based his poem on these stories, not the other way around. But Cook was the origin. He said so himself multiple times. The dogman was his own creation. But it also happened to slot in perfectly with an already established cryptid, the werewolf. Half man, half canine, standing on two legs, roaming around the woods in search of moonlit dinner. It was a story everybody knew because everybody knew what a werewolf was. Cook inadvertently, or maybe intentionally, crafted a legend that played just enough on established tropes. This once-a-decade cycle, the mysterious attacks, all of these things are common urban legend ideas just repackaged with a familiar but fresh monster. Not a werewolf, a dogman.
Clever.
Yeah. And coincidentally, Cook just happened to unleash his cryptid on a world that was primed for it. You have the backdrop of the satanic panic and a religious resurgence that needed a villain to rally against. This sounds outrageous, I know, but Cook's Dogman was the perfect scapegoat for evangelists to pour their fears and rhetoric into, and it gave the myth a life that spread beyond an April Fool's Day folk song. Now, even though he claimed to be the originator of the story, some people still, to this day, doubt Cook's assertion of that. They believe that Cook was merely retelling Dogman stories he's heard. But guess what? It's not hard to trace the literature. There's no evidence of canine human sightings prior to Cook's song in that area. There's not. Like, there weren't werewolves popping around at any time before that. Beyond the lore of werewolves, lycanthropy, cyanocephaly of antiquity, there's nothing to support these claims. The lumberjack story that Linda Godfrey came across, that was ripped directly from Cook's poem.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, the lumberjacks, they found the dog, they were playing with it, it stood upright. Like, that's straight out of Cook's poem.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, the only story that doesn't factor into this is Mark Shackleman's, seeing the dog-headed creature digging at the burial mound. But that story, remember, was Mark Shackleman told his son, who told Linda Godfrey. Mark Shackleman was dead at the time. And his son was retelling the story inside this bubble of Linda Godfrey looking for Dogman sightings.
And then we don't know what she primed him, how she primed him.
We don't know that. I mean, we don't know how much of the story was an embellishment by his father. We don't know if his father was pulling his leg. Like, we have no idea.
And I'm not saying that Linda Godfrey could have primed him intentionally.
Right.
I just think that sometimes when you're talking to somebody, you can lead them in a direction unintentionally. And I think that's why there's so much training out there for people that interrogate, because they're like, you're not supposed to do that.
Yeah. And remember, Linda Godfrey, I love her to death. I think the work she's done is fascinating. But she was a cartoonist. You know, she wasn't an investigative journalist. There's a big, big difference between her and, say, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, the journalist who broke Watergate, right? Like there's a huge difference. She was a cartoonist. Nothing wrong with that in particular, but she doesn't bring the same skill set to the table. Now, the original witnesses, Laurie Andrezzi, Doris Gibson, they claimed they had never heard Cook's poem before their sightings. But regardless, their personal experience, it had been woven into the tapestry of local lore, whether they had heard it or not. Remember all the people calling up Cook's show to report their own Dogman sightings. When Andrezzi and Gibson had their encounters, they were then retroactively fit into the pantheon of these incidents and became Dogman sightings. Whether they called them Dogman sightings or not, the community and Linda Godfrey said, oh, these are Dogman sightings. They fit within this formula. So the Dogman went relatively quiet for about a decade throughout the 90s. Cook did 2 re-recordings of his poem, adding additional lyrics in 1997 and a backing mandolin in 2007. These were obviously on the anniversary of the Dogman's 10-year cycle, so it was not really a surprise when a film surfaced on YouTube in 2007 as well, showing a bloodthirsty beast attack. It's called the Gable film. So the first section of this film appears to be regular old home video. Somebody snowmobiling, an unknown person chopping wood, skinny German shepherd playing in the snow, somebody working on an old truck, whatever. The whole thing looks like it was shot on 8mm, although the copies appear to be in a wider aspect ratio than that format normally would have been, because, 8mm is kind of the square format. About 3 minutes into this 3.5-minute clip, the camera shakily focuses on a squat but bulky animal in the forest. There's no snow for this section, but the leaves are off the trees, so we're thinking it's probably late fall, maybe early spring. The animal, whatever it is, stares at the camera for a second before stalking forward and then charging. The camera operator runs, the camera falls to the ground, and we see a flash of pointed teeth before a still shot of the underbrush, and then the film ends.
I didn't remember seeing the pointed teeth, but okay.
There's teeth.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a brief second.
Okay, I'll have to see it again. All right.
So could this be evidence of a dogman attack? This film circulated extensively on cryptozoology sites, with heavy hitters like Lauren Coleman weighing in. The owner of the Texas Museum of the Weird, Alex Vogel, he's the guy who owns the Minnesota Iceman now. He performed a very thorough analysis on the film in a series of blog posts. Vogel became fixated on the final few frames of the film, the ones with the teeth, you know? He says, it's just something about them teeth. He continues, the teeth I'm referring to are the ones that mysteriously come out of nowhere in the original Gable film, right before it comes to a jolting end, at exactly 3 minutes and 23 seconds. That's right. Notice I said come out of nowhere, not come into frame. That's because if you notice, there's no transition blur one would expect if they were to suddenly come into frame from one side. It just jumps from an image of the forest to an extreme close-up of the teeth in relatively good focus, I might add. And in addition to Vogel's concerns about it, the toothy concerns, when I watched the film, my focus was on the focus. See, most consumer 8mm cameras were not really designed for close-up or macro focus. They were home video cameras. You would use them to film your relatives at Christmas. You know, you film your cousin's birthday party. You're not doing ultra macro shots, right? You put an object too close to the lens, you lose focus. Now, some cameras had a macro mode which allowed the lens to shift focus for close-up shots. But the frames immediately before and after the teeth shots are clearly focusing on distant objects, so the lens's macro mode isn't engaged.
And it's not believable to think that the photographer there, videographer, would have, in his panic, thought, oh, I better put this on macro real quick before I run screaming back to the house.
And then switch it off after you see the teeth?
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense, right?
Not possible. Yeah.
In fact, the foliage in front of the lens in the final shot looks like it's about the same distance that the teeth were, but it's not as sharp as the teeth were. About a year later, a second part of the Gable film made its way online. This was a 90-second clip and appears to be a film from a police scene or like a piece of police film. It begins with a person dressed as a cop holding a piece of paper indicating that this is, quote, reel 2 attack scene. He then shows another card, vehicle registration Aaron Gable, and the camera shows the same truck from the previous clip, looking kind of abandoned somewhere. After a brief walk in the woods, the cop and the camera arrive at a tarp on the ground. Pulling it back reveals a mutilated torso, missing its legs. The film then shows 2 other evidence cards on the ground, a pair of glasses, and a Bell Howard 8mm camera. Then the film ends. This film seemed to have raised some connection to the previous Gable film. It answered some questions, but it raised others. If this was a police reel, who got it? And how did they get it? And what was the mysterious attack that has left this eviscerated corpse just on the ground?
Obviously, the first movie.
Right. Well, that's the idea, right? The idea is that, oh, now we're seeing more of this. Knowing something was off, Alex Vogel continued digging. And he soon discovered that the film had allegedly been found at an estate sale. This is such a classic. It's a classic in this space, right? Remember, the Dybbuk box was the same deal. Oh, I found this at an estate sale. Somebody was just getting rid of it because they didn't know what it was. It's so classic. You know who found that film at the estate sale? Steve Cook.
Really?
Of Traverse City. The same Steve Cook who had written and recorded the original Dogman poem and had been perpetuating the Dogman myth for the past 2 decades.
Wow, so he found it at an estate sale before? When did he find it? What year?
2007.
Oh, so after he came up with all the myth.
Yes, he did.
Oh, that's a lucky thing.
Lucky is one word for it, isn't it? Vogel reached out to Cook for comment, and here is the radio DJ's response. I have never stated the film is of a dogman. It is my policy to remain neutral on all evidence presented on my website. I prefer to let the viewer decide. 3 years later, in 2010, the final episode of Monster Quest aired on the History Channel. This episode, titled America's Wolfman, focused on the dogman, the Beast of Bray Road, and included the mysterious Gable film. This episode featured an interview with local machinist Mike Agrusa. He said, Steve Cook's song generated a lot of mass hysteria in 1987. It made the summer of '87 fun. It made people scared to go out into the woods. So I took it upon myself in 2007 to elaborate upon the story, to try to bring the mass hysteria back that it had in 1987. Agrusa faked the entire movie, the entire Gable film, using an authentic 8mm film camera and his personal vintage pickup truck. The dogman that attacked the camera operator was a ghillie suit, with the wearer bounding around on all fours. After trying unsuccessfully to promote his film, he contacted Steve Cook, who agreed to use his influence and history with the dogman as a springboard for the project.
Okay, so Steve Cook was in on it. Like
He was
knew
absolutely in on it.
Gotcha.
Yeah, Steve Cook thought the whole thing was hilarious.
Oh, yeah.
Agrusa even showed the Monster Quest crew how he created the severed torso using spray foam insulation for guts. The bottom half of the torso was a prosthetic, and the dead person stood in a hole that was like 3 feet deep up to the waist, effectively making their legs completely disappear. It was really cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's cool.
Response to the Monster Quest episode divided the cryptozoological community. This is the shit that happens whenever this stuff goes down, and it's wild to me. Because most people, I'll say most cryptozoologists like Lauren Coleman, they embrace the hoax. They said, okay, hoax, whatever, we get to move on with our lives. Sometimes they're even like, I thought something was off about it. But a small subset clung to the idea that whatever was on film was real. Agrusa was even accused of lying about the creature and saying that the hoax was a hoax to cover up the existence of the real dogman or a real dogman attack.
God, this is everywhere, man. This is prevalent in the alien community, the MUFON community.
So much. We're going to talk in a little later. We're going to talk about a story in one of the greatest alien examples of this that I've ever encountered. But yeah, it's such a common thing that happens here because I think people get so invested in the mythology of all of this. And they put so much of themselves into believing that the dogman is real and that this Gable film is real. And then the person comes forward and says, no, it's not. And they say, no, it has to be.
Well, it's a bit of a sunk cost thing.
Right.
And then I think it's also like you start to remove the pieces from the house of cards, and then what else is going to fall?
Right.
If you doubt one thing, you're going to start to doubt everything.
Well, and there again, if you hinge your belief in religion, in evil, in the devil, something like that, on the existence of a dogman, you can kind of see how knocking down this house of cards can upset all of that. It's sort of the flip side of what religion is doing, promoting these myths. Where religion says, okay, all we have to do is invalidate science, and then if we invalidate science, maybe it means that gods are real. On the flip side, if you invalidate the monster, well, then it means religion may not be real.
Right. I really think doubt is one of the scariest things when it comes to organized religion. Because once you start to doubt one thing, then you begin to doubt more. It's a fucking avalanche.
All you need is that crack, right?
Yeah, and it's the same thing with this.
Yeah.
Because that was how it was for me and my religious beliefs. It was just one thing. Didn't make sense. And then after that, it was like, pfft.
Do you remember what that one thing was?
There was one thing, and then there was a couple of big things after that. But I think the main thing, and I remember this as a kid, it didn't make any sense to me why people who didn't believe in the Christian God, the Western idea of a man in the sky, all those people who either didn't, it's not who didn't believe, it's who wasn't aware of it.
Okay.
They were going to hell.
Okay.
Like, they had no concept of this God, but they were still going to go to hell because they hadn't been saved. This made no fucking sense to me. And that began the descent into my atheism.
That's the crack, right?
It was a crack. Why would that even happen? Also, like, how like, if Jesus is watching me all the time, then Jesus is watching me pee, which doesn't make any sense because there's people that need to be watched in the world more than me, like people that actually need help. So it didn't make sense to me that Jesus was always watching me.
God's a pervert.
Yeah, I always pictured him.
That's the clearest example.
Yeah, when I was a little kid, we had a window in the bathroom that was high up, and I always pictured Jesus looking through the window, watching me pee. I saw his, like, his white skin and blue eyes and light brown hair and his little white robe. And I'd be like, yes, Jesus, I'm peeing and I'm going to wash my hands when I'm done. It didn't make any sense after a while.
I know that exact window, and it's really hilarious because it is like adult head height.
Yeah.
So you could totally see somebody with their fingers like on the windowsill, like peering in very much. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Like the Big Brother style, like just nose up.
Yeah.
Oh.
But he loves me so much, so it's okay. What does that teach little kids? Nothing good. Next time you go to the bathroom at my house, you have to think about that.
I will think about Jesus watching me pee.
Good.
Although if I'm standing up, we're like eye to eye. We just high five.
That's just uncomfortable. You're not supposed to do that.
No, you never make eye contact.
Right.
So anyway, Linda Godfrey agreed that the Gable film was a hoax, but she remained a staunch supporter of the Dogman for the remainder of her life. And she has since passed on, but Lauren Coleman has devoted an entire section of his Museum of Cryptozoology to her memory. Her books on the Beast of Bray Road and the Dogman are on display, along with a large paw and a life-sized replica of the beast.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Now, in recent years, the Dogman and the Beast of Bray Road still continue to get occasional boosts from various internet forums like Reddit, 4chan, those kind of darker corners of the internet. We see this almost like infectious cycle again of discovery, myth-making, new generations uncover the singular incidents, and then they dig themselves down rabbit holes. You remember we talked about this almost infectious cycle of myth, where, you have the myth, it comes out, there are people who are quote-unquote infected by it, then eventually as reason, as logic, as explanation comes through, we consider them inoculated. Some people are naturally resistant or immune to it because they're skeptical. But what happens then is that a new generation comes forward, especially with the internet. They encounter these myths again, they get retold, and a whole new generation is infected. Mm-hmm. And there are certain myths that sort of like these, the Dogman, that because they're so fringe, a lot of times the response to that becomes, why aren't more people talking about this? And then you have these people who feel like they have encountered a comfy little secret that's all theirs, and they're in on something that a lot of people don't know. And that feels good to us, and it feels good to have that quote-unquote infection in us. And so this is one of the reasons why I think the Dogman has been able to propagate so much, especially online. In 2020, a photo appeared online of the alleged Beast of Bray Road. This photo, apparently taken by a dash cam at night, shows a bipedal dog-like creature standing at the side of the road. And what's most haunting about this particular image are the creature's stunted forelegs, which are totally skinless, showing only white bones.
Ooh.
Yeah. It's creepy. Do you want to see that one?
Yeah. What in the motherfuck is that?
It's creepy, right?
Yeah.
You can see the bones in the legs. You have a
Yeah.
guess?
Photoshop, maybe?
I mean, it certainly could be.
So if it's not Photoshop, oh my God, I don't know. It looks like a domestic dog.
Yeah.
So a dog that got maybe hit by a car or something and is living somehow? I don't know.
Yeah, we really don't know, but there are a couple ideas of what this is. So it originated on a website called WisconsinFrights.com, who claimed that they got it from a local resident named Danny Morgan. If the story is entirely true and Morgan didn't fake the photo, it's possible that this is some poor wolf or coyote whose front paws were damaged in some way. I mean, we see those bones. Maybe they were caught in a trap. And it wouldn't be unheard of for that animal to learn to walk upright, at least for short periods, because I'm sure that its paws are hurting.
Yeah.
Now, to me, it seems pretty likely that he faked this photo or someone faked this photo. And I think it might have happened with a piece of roadkill, which was positioned upright to look as if it was walking. That explains the decayed appearance. Apparently this happened in December, so it was winter, so it could have been a frozen roadkill carcass. Although, admittedly, I'm not convinced that this theory is more reasonable than an injured canine.
Well, I don't know how they would have gotten it to stand upright and walk away long enough.
You would just need, well, it wouldn't walk. It's just one photo. It's not actual footage from a dash cam. It's just one photo.
No, I know, but how did you even get it to stand up long enough to take the photo?
No, you could create a support system for it if you
Okay.
wanted to. But that, I will say, that is sort of making a more complex explanation for something that might not need to be so complex.
I think I know what happened.
What?
I think, let's keep things simple. I think that aliens came down and saw that on the road and then propped it up themselves and took a picture using a tractor beam to hold it up and then sent it off to people. And then they flew back into their fifth dimension.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously the most logical explanation.
Yeah. You heard it here first.
The more I read about this legend, I can't help but compare it to lycanthropy. Stories of the dogman and werewolves are strangely infectious. Allison Hudson of Skeptoid compares the dogman to other urban legends, like the hook-handed killer attacking teens in cars. It's a brush with the unknown, a supernatural reminder that there's something scary out there in the dark. In much the same way that werewolf myths thrived during the Satanic Panic in the 18th century France, the Dogman and the Beast of Bray Road rose to prominence during a similar inquisition in the 1990s in America. And those stories became great fodder for the new internet frontier, where their proliferation can happen faster than ever and find their way to an even larger population. A population that becomes caught up in a werewolf or dogman obsession, or infection, if you will. Lycanthropy, at least turning into werewolves, it's not real, but maybe the stories of lycanthropy are the real virus, the thing that influences you. It won't make you sprout hair or run through the woods hunting livestock, but it might make you tell stories about creatures that do. Werewolves, dogmen, skinwalker, they are fringe creatures in cryptozoology, but that somehow makes them more tantalizing. They are animals that defy science as we know it, carving out a niche in the Fortean world that connects natural, rational thinking with the supernatural monsters of antiquity. And if we're not careful, they may still overrun us, poisoning us with their own lycanthropic infection of misinformation.
Ooh, scary.
And that's
Very
the
scary.
story of the Beast of Bray Road and the Minnesota Dogman.
Not just a story of a dogman, but a story of how society can fall into this kind of groupthink. Nothing is ever just about the thing.
No,
There's
not
always
at all.
something
Not at
else,
all.
you know?
If it was just about the thing, we wouldn't have much of a podcast.
Yeah.
Well, and I hate to say it, but a lot of times that is all that gets reported. People are just like, oh yeah, somebody hit a dog man with their car and this thing. And but you don't take the time to look at the tapestry that has formed the background of all of that. So best case scenario, you might be like, oh yeah, and it came from Steve Cook and Steve Cook's ideas, whatever, right? But you still need, like, this is why the dogman image, iconography is like so deep-seated in human history. This is why, we formed a springboard for all of these with a satanic panic, with this idea that, things were running off the rails because people were playing D&D and they were engaging in these sort of occult practices and summoning these monsters, or at least allowing these monsters the opportunity to break through, You need all of that to be able to really understand why somebody could look at a dark shape along the side of the road and 2 years later say, oh yeah, that was a dog-headed human and it was satanic.
Yeah, it seems like a crazy jump, but yeah, if you look at the whole culture of everything going on, it makes some sense. And that's why it's important to look at this stuff and also to be able to identify it when it comes up again, because it will.
Absolutely.
And so for that reason, we'll never run out of episodes.
No, never. I mean, and that's the funny thing too, is that it keeps happening, right? The heyday of the dogman was the early 1990s. And then it dipped for a while. And then it popped back up in 2007, 2008, 2010. And then it dipped again. And now I've seen a little resurgence of the dogman recently. It just cycles, man. For all the joking that Steve Cook did about that, his dogman really is cycling about every 10 years. But it's not because the dogman's going into the woods and then coming out. It's because they keep bumping up against this story again, and it's a new generation.
Yeah.
All the more reason for people to, research and learn about something. And I don't know. I mean, if it's a thing that gets people interested in cryptozoology, I think that's cool, as long as they come to cryptozoology with an open head, an open mind, but not
an open head. That's dangerous.
No, not an open head. But an open mind, but not so open that the brain falls out.
There you go.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, that's our dogman. Dog person. I still have not come up with a good explanation for why it's specifically a dogman. It's always a he. In the books, it's always he, the dogman. So I'm sure there are dog women out there, but I don't really want to go on the sites where there are dog women.
You never know what you're going to get.
I know, really. That's the internet these days.
It might awaken something in you.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Any more thoughts about the dogman, EJ?
No, not really. Just that I want a doggy someday. And I want Jesus to stop watching me pee. He's such a pervert.
Come on, Jesus.
Come on, Jesus.
Next time, we're going to have something a little bit different. We're going to talk about one of the coolest influences on the Fortean, I think, that I encountered, and certainly somebody who helped to get me into the Fortean studies. So I'm really excited about it. But for now, thank you all so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Be safe out there.
Bye. Next time, you stand at the edge of a cliff, the cold coastal water lapping the rocks below you. Beside you, a bearded man mutters an arcane chant. His incantation is the lure that will finally reveal your quarry, a monster lurking in the inky black depths of the sea.
Thanks for listening to Slaying Monsters, the Fortean History Podcast. If you like the podcast, there's a couple ways you can show your support. You can tell your friends, you can leave us a rating and review on your podcast platform, or you can head over to slayingmonsterspodcast.com and click on the Support Us button to leave a donation. For questions, suggestions, and other feedback, reach out to us, slayingmonsterspodcast@gmail.com, and stay up to date by following us on socials @slayingmonsterspodcast. Your support helps us grow, and we are truly grateful to have our listeners and community.